Hot topic here for Wednesday, October 16th, the morning after United States men's national team lose to Mexico 2-0 in a friendly. There was a lot of departures, already plenty of injuries in the starting lineup of the most healthy side. So American depth was tested, and you'd say the test was failed.
It was indeed failed. I don't. This is one thing I don't like. I don't like having to debate with our fellow fans on the internet, or even Mexico fans for that matter, who might want to puff up the Mexican win. And of course, 2-0 is a little bit extra painful for us. The Mexican fans want to puff up this victory. Of course, they want to make it seem like they did something big here. So they'll say things like, "Oh, this is only an A- team," or something like that. I don't like having to try to figure out where on the grade scale this group of U.S. men's national team players is. It bothers me because, again, it speaks directly to a supreme lack of depth for the American side that was in evidence last night. Now, I think if Mexico was better, and I don't think they're good, it would have been even uglier. The United States, again, did almost nothing on the attacking end of the field, but that is exactly the point, right? If I'm looking at the lineup last night, so Matt Turner in goal, you could still argue he's the number one. Okay, fine. Played relatively well against Panama. Definitely thought there were some issues with his distribution last night. Otherwise, not sure he made any mistakes. Both of the shots that went in then beat him were shots he wasn't going to save. I think there was maybe a deflection off of Tim Ream's head slightly on the Jimenez free kick. Jedi Robinson played a half. He's a starter. Tim Ream, I mean, again, played both games. We have no reason to think he's not a starter right now. If we're just talking about that, fine. Miles Robinson, I don't know. Chris Richards isn't there. Is he a starter for you? I'll let you decide that. But certainly there's an argument that he's not the best you have to offer that position. Joe Scally started on the right side. Serginho Dest would play there if he was healthy. I don't care about the issues as a defender or whatever else you want to go into. He would start there. That midfield of Musa, Bucio, Morris, that's not the midfield in any way, shape, or form in a competitive match for the U.S. men's national team when people are healthy. Weston, Tyler, we can obviously go down the list. Musa would maybe be in there, but there are certainly other options. Gio Reyna playing in midfield. Okay, but maybe Gio Reyna plays where Malik Tillman did, or Brendan Aronson did. Aronson, Tillman, Sargent. Okay, sure. I'm not so thrilled about Balogun's form with the national team to think that he is untouchable as the starter, but he's certainly a very talented player who was not available and would have likely played in this game, perhaps from the start. So we're talking about, what, 2 or 3 starters at most in this game? And here's the problem with international football. And Pochettino, again, intellectually he knows this, but it's very different than the club game in that you can't go find a new player to add to your depth when the window opens. What you got is what you got. Now, you hope that maybe somebody emerges or there's a young player who develops quickly. But what we're seeing here is that the U.S. depth is severely lacking. And if they don't have everybody, and when do you ever have everybody, Robert? When is that ever a thing for anybody in international football? I mean, it very rarely happens. Without everybody available, without the Pulisics and the Reynas and the Dests and whoever else, they're going to suffer. Even against a pretty poor Mexican team historically.
Yeah, when do you ever have all of your players healthy at the same time? It's, threading a needle. And that's why there needs to be, upwards of 20 or 30, legit top players so that, when, injuries that happen, you'll have somebody that's there to step up. And we can, to evaluate the depth, I thought the only person I thought I wanted to see in the starting lineup that wasn't. I thought that was a missed note by Pochettino. I think Zendejas, he hadn't seen much playing time. He had a little bit of skin in the game playing in Mexico. His heritage of being Mexican and choosing the United States. He was getting booed when he did see the field. I thought that he could have added a little bit more pressure and intensity to that game, and he wasn't utilized. And he did well when he came on. I'm glad for him. He hasn't done much in the United States uniform so far since declaring or switching to play for the United States, represent the United States. But if we're going to evaluate the depth of like units of, goalkeeper, D, midfield, and forward,
Yeah.
let's be honest. So, the depth at goalkeeper, what would you rate that? Mediocre at best. We have some players at some decent clubs not playing. Defense, the only one with, a big catalog, a career history is Tim Ream, and his days are,
Well, I mean, look, Jedi Robinson is maybe the most consistent, best player we have outside of Pulisic in the national team right now. I think you could make that argument. I got no issue with left back. I mean, again, it's depth, right? You're saying that behind the guys that we have behind our first choice guys, right? If you talk about the group, right? Okay, what's our center back group look like? Yeah, that's your point.
We can't even pick out who would you pick out as the starting center back duo.
No, yeah, we have this is what you said, the word mediocre, and it might even be kind in some of these positional groups, because we have in most cases, maybe not center back, but most cases we have at least one guy that you go, hey, that's a pretty decent player, and when he's on the field, we get something good out of him, especially in this part of the world. Against a Mexico in CONCACAF competition, you got Nations League next month with Jamaica, 2 games. That I think is okay for the most part. I mean, I'm not saying that they play together in a way that I'm always enthused about. That's different. That's why Berhalter's not there anymore and why Pochettino is now in charge. But if you're just talking about the quality of the players that are available, yeah, it's like it is very, very shallow, the depth of this team. And I don't know how you fix it
I think
before
that's
2026.
And in times of the past, that was one of the things I credited the Mexican talent pool with. Even when their stars weren't there, they always had almost a plethora of those replacement level players. They weren't necessarily game breakers, but there always seemed to be players at the international level to be called up. So if we're continuing on evaluating the groupings in the United States talent pool, to your point, in the midfield, yeah, there's the standouts, the McKinneys and the Adams. They're not always available. So who is that, national stage replacement level player?
It's a lot of guys that there are some guys who are pretty decent in their club situations who, for whatever reason, it doesn't show up, or they're just not a perfect fit. I don't think Busio was bad last night or over the 2 games.
Was he in the right place?
Do I think it maybe, but do I think he's a player that I'm going to be enthusiastic about going into big games for the national team, particularly when we get to the World Cup in 26? No, I thought he was a little bit more physical last night than I remember him in a national team shirt, which is a positive, but he's not on a McKennie level. And he's not on an Adams level if we're talking about a defensive midfielder. And even then, Adams is a player who has a lot of deficiencies in terms of playing the ball forward. So we could talk about that. I mean, Luca De La Torre, not in this team. Was that because of injury or because he's not playing at Celta Vigo? So much of this is like imperfect situations with those things as well. Ricardo Pepi, somebody asked in the chat, why does Josh Sargent get called up? He hasn't scored for the national team since 2019.
That's a long time.
He gets called up because there aren't better options. That's why he gets called up. I mean, you could argue, okay, Brendan Vasquez came on last night.
Haji Wright has definitely scored more recently than Sargent.
No, he has scored more recently for the national team than Sargent, but is he a guy that you want to play in that position with whatever Pochettino wants to do? Like, I think it's pretty clear that over these 2 games, Pochettino picked a center forward who can hopefully give you that long option with his back to goal. They tried to do that several times last night with Sargent. Maybe it didn't always come off, but especially if you know there's going to be a high line of confrontation, you want to be able to do that. I mean, you have to have options. I think, on paper, this is the problem. On paper, a player like Sargent is attractive because he seems to have a lot of tools to bring to the table, but then they don't manifest in the game and you have this disconnect. And that seems to be a lot of guys. Johnny Cardoso was a good example of that, right? If you're talking about midfield depth, and obviously he got sent home because of injury, but if you're talking about midfield depth, Johnny Cardoso feels like midfield depth, but every time I see him on the field, I'm unimpressed by what he does for the U.S. men's national team. Malik Tillman is a good player in Holland. He scores goals. He creates opportunities. He is confident when he plays for PSV Eindhoven. When he steps into a national team situation, he doesn't look anything like that player. And am I going to stand here and say you can't call up Malik Tillman anymore because he never delivers on the national team level? No, I'm not going to say that because I don't know where you go from there. Like, where do you go? As somebody clamoring for Georgi Mihalovic to come back into this team? Do you think he's a better option than Malik Tillman when he couldn't hack it in the league where Malik Tillman is now thriving? These are tough questions. This is why international football is so difficult. And for this team in this moment, it's difficult because we have some players who get you excited, but then you look past those players and you don't see a lot. And even when a player is attached to a good team in Europe or a good league or thriving in a situation even, it doesn't translate.
So depth, definitely a question. Test failed last night against Mexico. The 7-game unbeaten streak is over, and the national team returns in November. We can't wait.
Woo!
As the return of the Nations League.
Fired up. Let's go. Let's go play the Reggae Boys again. Fun times.